Hello, beautiful homemakers. We are in Pamphlet 4, Chapter 7 of the original 1922 Fascinating Womanhood pamphlets. This subheading is called Learn from These Women. Women like the widow in this case, that we talked about in the last video, whom every man wants to indulge and humor, are the kind of women you are to learn from. The very fact that a woman is used to being pampered adds to her attractiveness. Nearly everyone, perhaps, has noticed that the only daughter who is her father's darling is usually alarmingly fascinating to every man she meets. She is so accustomed to being loved and spoiled by her father that she looks upon this indulgence and spoiling as the natural prerogative of womanhood, and expects other men to humor and delight in her girlish whims and caprices in the same manner her father does. In so doing, she exhibits the most cuddlesomely girlish side of her nature, the side which is most different from man's own nature, and which is therefore the most attractive to him. It's not attractive to other women. She seems a creature just made to be caressed and spoiled, shielded and cherished. She is therefore irresistibly appealing to a man's manhood, the chivalrous side of him, that craves to caress and fondle, protect and care for some tender creature that would be frightened and bewildered if not able to depend upon man's superior strength and courage. In her presence he feels the glory of being a real man, the brave and mighty male who since time began has fought for, worked for, and conquered for its womankind. And in the last 3 pamphlets, we have discussed this in depth. Little wonder that he adores the girl who inspires this exhilarating and rapturous realization of his manhood. Little wonder that he is blind to 100 defects in her appearance and character, so long as she gives him this glorious realization of strength and power. And we have discussed that that's why some men choose badly. This girlishness is so attractive to them that sometimes they choose a woman that will make them miserable instead of a more capable or intelligent woman. We have discussed this in depth, so if you haven't listened to the past 3 pamphlets, please don't comment. Even video games get this right. Just think of one of the most famous games of Mario rescuing the princess. It is so foolish of women to throw away this greatest characteristic of man by not needing him. Many women today tear down the walls of their own homes with their own hands in this way, just as the Bible says. Remember that the world is lying to you regarding how men and women interact. Men and women are extremely different in how they act and what they want in a spouse. The next section is Make Yourself Somebody's Darling. In the 1935 version, it's called Make Men Want to Do Things for You. In acquiring this air of femininity, it is advisable, in addition to studying exceptionally feminine women and practicing their tricks of manner, that you make yourself somebody's darling, for the air of expecting to be indulged and humored is one of the most appealing feminine tricks of all. You can make yourself the darling of your father, your grandfather, your uncle, or your big brother. If you lack such an accommodating relative, then see if you can't get every man you meet to humor and spoil you. This humoring and spoiling is the natural homage men owe to womankind. You can insist upon their paying it to you without the loss of an atom of your self-respect. I'm picturing the daughter from Father Knows Best. she was a master at this game. This next sentence is long, and it is in all caps. The only way to create the desire on a man's part to pamper you in this manner is constantly to bring out and emphasize the contrast between your tenderness and his strength, to intimate by your every action how much you, as a woman, are dependent upon the bravery, power, and generosity of man. Let me interject here. This is only appealing to men, not to us women. We don't like to see it in other women, but men like it. In fact, we might roll our eyes at a woman who we think is going over the top in this regard, but to her man, ladies, men obviously adore this trait, because these are the girls who get snapped up first by men. So let me reread this. The only way to create the desire on a man's part to pamper you in this manner is constantly to bring out and emphasize the contrast between your tenderness and his strength, to intimate by your every action how much you as a woman are dependent upon the bravery, power, and generosity of man. We have just observed how the widow in the last video accomplished this. The sweet resignation of her countenance, her pretty uneasiness, her confusion at finding herself stared at, her hesitancy at acting before so much company, her arch pretense of absorption in her business. Such actions make the man feel that the woman is a weak, tender little creature, in contrast to him, to make him feel, in addition, that he is in reality a much more powerful and able individual than he has hitherto considered himself. He is reminded that he is a man and is made proud of his manhood at one and the same moment, and the woman who calls up this pleasurable sensation is naturally felt to be the most womanly woman of all. His first impulse is to use this newly appreciated power, this glorious feeling of mastery, to protect and take care of the tender little creature who has aroused it. The fluttering little bird therefore immediately becomes an object to be comforted, cheered, and sheltered. Every word he says, and every act he performs in pursuing this purpose, gives him a wonderful pleasure, because every such word and act makes him feel like a man and a hero. As this is a most flattering and agreeable feeling, the woman inspiring it has an irresistible attraction for him, and as humoring and spoiling her serves to intensify this pleasant feeling, he will have an overwhelming desire to continue this humoring and spoiling, so long as her manner indicates an apparent need for his indulgent protection. Again, this is why in many cases men choose badly. We think this is over the top. And so it really only comes naturally when you're with a man you really love, or when you've cultivated girlishness. Hence the fondness of all lovers for so-called baby talk, which emphasizes the woman's childlikeness and her dependence upon the man for protection, and contrast these qualities with the man's competence and strength. Also, the well-known attractiveness of the baby vamp. Vamp in 1922 meant a woman who used her charisma and beauty to charm men into doing what she wanted them to do. Men are drawn to the childlike innocence in women, and when you are harsh or strong in your opinions and how you speak and how you act, you lose all your feminine charm. So remember, a video or two ago we talked about why young women are the easiest to fall in love with. Because younger women bring out the man's God-given natural instinct to protect and care for her. If you don't need care and protection, then a man will not feel the innate desire to love and care and cherish and provide for you. It really is that simple. Think about Marilyn Monroe. Men went gaga for her. And this section also reminds me of that Jane movie I was telling you about earlier. The girl can't help it. Jane's character just wants to be a homemaker, but her fiancé wants her to sing. She definitely portrays many of the fascinating womanhood characteristics we will later learn about. But of course, she has got an incredible figure. But in this comedy, she makes every man that she meets feel like a hero. The next section is called The Story About the Family Darling, or in the 1935 version, it's called One Way to Get Attention. The best way to learn how to make yourself somebody's darling, how to bring out these contrasts, is to watch the spoiled darling of an indulgent father. We will now follow one of them through the day, beginning with her appearance at breakfast in a dainty boudoir cap and an adorably cuddlesome dressing gown. Dad is buried behind his newspaper in an easy chair, and for once nobody pays attention to her. Mother is busy superintending the preparation of breakfast, and Big Brother has not yet made his appearance. She waits a minute or two for her dad to greet her, then creeps up to him and quickly snatches the paper out of his hands. Dad looks up in astonishment and beholds a pouting daughter looking upon him with rebukeful eyes. Dad knows very well what is the matter, but he asks her just for the sake of hearing her tell him. "I want to be noticed," she informs him in an affectedly hurt tone. What then can Dad do but chuckle and take her on his knee? Thus she brings out the contrast between her own tender dependence upon his notice for happiness and his manly independence and thoughtlessness. With this little girl so dependent upon him for happiness, Dad is immediately and pleasurably reminded of his manhood. He chuckled not so much at her airs as at the pleasant sensation of bigness and ability those airs had aroused in him. He was ready to drop interesting news to love on his daughter a while and prolong the sensation. At the breakfast table our darling is very archly and obviously attentive to her father's wants. She passes him this and that, presses him to take another helping of something else, insists upon his having another cup of coffee, and refuses to let him drop his own sugar into it. Big Brother, who has meantime appeared, looks at Dad with understanding eyes and asks him what he thinks she wants now. Mother and Dad both laugh at this sally, for this little play has been enacted time and time again. Our darling now assumes a deeply injured air, as much as to say, "You don't appreciate my kindness to you," making both Big Brother and Dad feel rather brutal for injuring her delicate feeling. Ladies, did you ever act this way with your father? I did, but it was with his evening paper. We didn't have morning papers. Every night when he would get home from work, my younger brother and I would greet him, but then our mother had a rule that we had to play in our bedrooms for the next half hour. So I would watch that clock, and as soon as the half hour was up, I would crawl down the hallway, and then I would pop up through his evening paper, tossing it aside. I actually thought I was surprising my dad every single night, and he must have had a huge smile on his face as he watched us crawl down the hallway in his peripheral vision. Can you think back on some of the rituals you had with your father, if you were lucky enough to have a father in the home? If you can't imagine what I'm talking about, watch Father Knows Best or the Donna Reed show, I think. Even Lucy did this with Ricky. And I hope this goes without saying, we are not talking about childishness. We are talking about childlikeness. The joy the pouting, but it's not a bratty pouting. It is a sweet pout, basically saying, I'm not happy, pay attention to me. You can use it on your boyfriend and you can use it on your husband, but you would never use it on your boss or a coworker. The story continues. After a short pause, she persists in her attentions to Dad, even to the extent of holding his coat for him as he prepares to leave. At the door, she whispers something in his ear that makes him chuckle again. I thought so, he says, pinching her cheek, and Big Brother wants to know what she wants this time. The little minx wants a new hat, explains Dad as he reaches into his pocket. With the money finally in her hand, our darling jumps up and down for joy, gives her father a hug, sticks out her tongue at her brother, and flies upstairs to dress for her shopping trip. Father leaves in a glow of happiness. So great is his pride in himself that he can give this little bird, so utterly dependent upon him for care, the things that give her joy. The contrast that has been brought out between his strength, his ability to provide for her, and her womanly dependence upon that ability, makes him feel like twice the man other men are. Throughout the morning he unconsciously pities other men he meets, who he imagines are not the men to give such comfort and happiness to their womenkind. And if you've ever watched any of the old black and white Nancy Drew movies from the 1930s, she also acted this way with her father. She doted on him, and he, in turn, provided well for her. When men provide for women, they feel better about themselves and more like true men. But society has, in these last few generations, tried to tell women that this is shameful and lazy, and they've tried to tell men that there is no need to provide for a woman. It's impossible, and in fact, it's sexist. But it's not. It's natural. Why not make the best life possible for the two of you at home? Why not have what he makes be enough? I do know that there are exceptions. It's very difficult to live on minimum wage. But in my book, I detail a story or two about how that is done. It is still possible to not have to work full time if it's interfering with a really good home life and a wonderfully loving marriage and taking care of your own children. One thing that's a must is you must be sure that you are being a huge help at home and not a huge hindrance at home. I know that 20 years ago, you could buy a home in California for $200,000, and today that same home might be $800,000. And yet, I know of a couple that just bought their dream home. They had been at our church for years and hadn't owned, and then all of a sudden, they moved away about, an hour and a half away and bought a home, and they still continue to come to church on Sundays. And then 2 years later, I heard that they had moved again, a little bit closer to Los Angeles. And 2 years later, they moved again. And I was talking to her, and I asked about the move, and she said, yeah, we bought far away, stayed there for 2 years, sold the house, used the equity to buy a home closer to LA, did the same thing again, and just kept it going until they had their dream home. I think they might have even started with a mobile home. Where there is a will, there is a way. There are many other ways to do this, to be able to be at home. We're going to continue the story. She meets her brother's friend. She accompanies Big Brother downtown. They chance to meet one of her brother's business acquaintances, and introductions follow. They are about to cross the intersection of two busy streets. With the natural carelessness of brothers, Big Brother starts to cut through the traffic, expecting her and her new acquaintance to follow. But not our darling. She tremblingly pauses at the curb, alarmed at the prospect of trusting herself amid the heavy traffic. Of course, this alarm is mostly pretense, But such playful pretense has become so habitual with her where men are concerned that she hardly realizes it's pretense at all. As any man would, her new acquaintance takes charge of the frightened creature, waits for a pause in the traffic, and then masterfully, though amid much fluttering and trepidation on her part, seizes her arm and steers her through to the other side. Before they step upon the opposite curb, the contrast between this timid creature, so trustingly dependent upon his firm and fearless guidance, and his own manly self, insensible of danger, has been brought home to him. In the presence of such a divergence between her gentle timidity and his confident strength, he feels like a man indeed. His blood surges with the realization of his manhood and simultaneously of her womanhood, a realization that is the most enjoyable experience a man can have. Big Brother secretly winks at our darling as much to say, "I see you have another victim," and takes his leave. But the new acquaintance doesn't feel as if it would be right to permit this soft little bundle of girlishness to steer through the crowds alone, and therefore forgets 2 or 3 business appointments in order to act as her guide and protector for the morning. He feels twice the man he was before he met her, and he wants to enjoy the sensation as long as he can. The first thing that comes to my mind when I read this is how rude of that man to forget 2 or 3 business appointments. The second thing that came to my mind was, this actually works. If you want a man to take better care of you, be timid crossing traffic. If you find your boyfriend or husband charging off without you, just hang back until he returns for you. Now, obviously, I am not talking about crossing at a crosswalk or a signal, but in busy neighborhood streets where you don't know if the traffic is going to stop for you. Now, if you watch old shows such as Bewitched, you'll notice that Darren always takes Samantha's arm and guides her everywhere, as Ben used to do. Personally, I am glad that that has stopped, just as I'm sure you are, as being held by the arm can be annoying, especially if the man is a stranger. But we have also lost the closeness of walking arm in arm today, and men certainly are not as attentive as they were 60 years ago, and overall, that's just sad. Okay, and this last part we're going to cover today, because it goes with this story, is the keynote of her fascination. Thus, she goes through the day throwing herself upon the protection and care of every man she meets. She must always be waited upon or protected or guided or sheltered or noticed or appreciated or humored. She looks upon this as the natural prerogative of woman and expects men to bow to that prerogative. If she plays golf, she can never find her own ball. At the beach, she is afraid to let the man get more than a foot or 2 away when in the water. And at a party, she simply can't fill her own punch glass. At all times and everywhere, she exhibits a helpless dependence upon man. In my case, when we are at a restaurant where you have to go get food from the counter, I long ago stopped doing that, unless 2 people are needed to hold 2 trays. I also no longer get up to throw away the trash. Again, that's the man's job. The next sentence is in all caps. Her very expectation that men are always able to help her, that they are so much more capable of doing things than she, is a most flattering and agreeable thing to the men themselves, especially since it indicates her supreme confidence and belief in their manly ability to meet any requirement and every occasion. And this immediately brought to my mind the book, The Superior Wife Syndrome, Why Women Do Everything So Well and Why, for the sake of our marriages, We've Got to Stop. Give Up Control and Return to Intimacy by Carin Rubenstein. Let me read to you a little bit from page 241 and 242. Helene is talking. Neither of us gets upset if one does a little more because we want to and not because we have to, and we appreciate even the smallest things. Remember what I said about thanking him for everything? Helene is blissfully happy with her marriage and her intimate life, and she can't imagine that will ever change even after she has children. Listen to these wives long enough, and they began to sound so sappy and sentimental. It's as if they're living in some kind of marital fairy tale, a wifely Disneyland. Indeed, to many superior wives, such a marriage seems a near impossibility, one that's too good, too perfect to be true. Still, non-superior wives are real, and although they are in the minority, they are a powerful and exemplary group. They are potential role models for superior wives everywhere, shining possibilities of what could and should be. And that is what we are talking about here, ladies. So let me read the sentence from Fascinating Womanhood one more time. This sounds like a sappy story to you, but it's the truth. Her very expectation that men are always able to help her, that they are so much more capable of doing things than she, is a most flattering and agreeable thing to the men themselves, especially since it indicates her supreme confidence and belief in their manly ability to meet any requirement and every occasion. That sentence was in caps, and now we'll continue. She can disappoint a man time and again by doing something he doesn't like, and yet win his eager forgiveness by merely indicating her supreme confidence in his manly good nature, her expectation that a man such as he couldn't possibly refuse her tender little innocence anything she wanted. Such are the women who make doting slaves of mankind. Her method requires that she use every occasion to show her tenderness, timidity, daintiness, delicacy, helplessness, fear, and dependence upon man for guidance, protection, and care. Just today I needed the cat carrier down out of the garage. My husband pointed it to me and said, "It's on that wall." I knew where the cat carrier was, but I looked at it and saw how dirty it was in the bag, and said to myself, "I'm not going to touch that bag." And so I simply said to him, "Will you please get it down for me?" And of course he did. She shows these qualities not only in her actions, but in her girlish apparel, her eager voice, and her bird-like manner. Okay, we've talked about those three things in depth. Her girlish apparel, feminine dress, her eager voice, her pleasant voice, and her bird-like manner, and we talked about that in the last few videos. She is so contented to be thus dependent, so happy when he gives her his protection or grants her whimsical desires, that a man can conceive of no greater joy than to keep on giving and granting these things to her forever. When no man is around, she may be quite capable of taking care of herself, but she will never show her capability in the presence of masculine eyes. It never occurs to her, however, that this helplessness is mere pretense, that she is merely setting up for a man. As she conceives it, such acting is what is expected of woman. The pretense has become so habitual, so instinctive, that it is practically unconscious. It is just a playful coquettishness that can in no wise be reprehensible. She is only obeying her instincts. And since I had role models of women like this in my church, I immediately, as a teenager, said, "That's who I want to emulate." And still, I didn't do it until after a failed marriage. And when I saw that I was doing something that bothered my second husband, I took a hard look at myself, and I went in search of what men need in a marriage. And I'm the one that changed accordingly. And guess what? Then he changed into being exactly what I needed. I know this was a long video. I'm sorry. I know most people won't listen to it, except for the people that are really desirous of change and of really wanting to know these secrets and to implement them in their life. And I know you will. It is completely doable.